Hello, my friends. Welcome to day 18 of 40 days to PMP exam success. It's a pleasure to have you here today. Thanks for following all the days from 1 to 17. Today, we're talking about engaged stakeholders, and we have 4 enablers for this task. The first one is analyze stakeholders. Use the power interest grid, influence impact grid, stakeholder cube, salience model. It really depends on the size and complexity of the project. Make sure you understand when to use a stakeholder cube versus a salience model versus the power interest grid. That takes us to the second enabler, categorize stakeholders. Categorize them by unaware, resistant, neutral, supportive, or leading, using the stakeholder engagement assessment matrix. Then you could also categorize them by those you need to manage close, keep satisfied, monitor, keep informed. Going to the third enabler, we have engage stakeholders by category. So depending on those categories, you engage those stakeholders. You engage them to move them from unaware to perhaps supportive or resistant to even neutral. It really depends on what you're seeking to do. But you can take these categories from the second enabler and you can proactively engage stakeholders to move them from where they are to where you want them to be, or maybe you just need to keep them there. That's what you do in the third enabler. And the fourth enabler, develop, execute, and validate a strategy for stakeholder engagement. This is where you look to see, are our stakeholders engaged? You monitor the engagement, and you could use surveys or a net promoter score to understand the stakeholders' feelings towards the project and understand how engaged they are. And that's all the stuff we're talking about today. But before we get into content on the road, let's jump into a few simple questions. The first question for today: you are a team member of an Agile project team. You need to communicate to somebody of higher rank in the organization. To facilitate timely, productive discussion and decision making, what should you do? A. Engage with a stakeholder directly rather than going through layers of management. B. Follow the proper hierarchical channel. C. Inform your project facilitator to make the decision. Or D. Consult with the project team about what to do. If you need more time, hit the pause button. The best answer to this question, my friends, since you are in the world of Agile, is to take the bull by the horns and engage with that individual directly to facilitate timely, productive decision making. Adaptive teams engage with stakeholders directly rather than going through layers and layers of management. One more question before we move into some content. Which stakeholder classification model is useful for larger projects containing complex networks of relationships with the stakeholder community? Is it the power interest grid, influence impact grid, stakeholder cube, or salience model? If you need more time, hit the pause button. And let's take a look at the answer. The answer to this question is not A and it's not B, because those are in essence very similar, very identical. However, I will say before you exam, make sure you understand the definitions of what power is, what interest means, and what influence means. Also what impact means. They are all different. And I found this out while I was seated in one of the PMI exams. You do not want that to happen to you. The best answer, my friends, is the salience model. The salience model describes classes of stakeholders based on assessments of their power level, level of authority, or ability to influence stakeholders. Now, I do want to point out, if you chose D, you are correct. In my listings of rationale, it does look like C, but it is D. All right, so the answer is salience model. You use the salience model when you have large, complex communities of stakeholders or where there are complex networks of relationships within the community, all right? And you can find this on page 512 to 513 in your PMBOK Guide 6th edition. So we've covered a lot of information, my friends. Let's jump into today's On the Road. Let's get on the road and let's talk next. Hello my friends, how you doing? It's your buddy Phil here. Welcome to 40 Days to PMP Exam Success. We are really picking up the pace, my friends. If you weren't aware, we are on to the process piece. And today we're talking about engaged stakeholders. This is day 18. Now, let's talk about engaged stakeholders. What is a stakeholder? A stakeholder is anyone who could be affected by the project, or anyone who could impact the project, and also anyone who thinks that they could be impacted. You see, those people who think that they could be impacted may actually be impacted, and sometimes they may not. But the bottom line is, if anyone turns up on your doorstep as a project manager to one of your meetings, and the person says, Project Manager A, I feel I'm a stakeholder, I've heard what's going on, and I want to be included in the information, you should take that person seriously, because that person very well may be a legitimate stakeholder. So your job here is to do a number of things. First of all, you're going to identify those people who could be impacted by the project, or those people who could impact the project. We call that identify stakeholders. And then you are going to plan how to get the stakeholders engaged. We call that planned stakeholder engagement. After that, you're going to carry out your plan for how to engage stakeholders by actually engaging them. And after you have engaged them, you should ask the question, am I engaging my stakeholders appropriately and effectively? If it's not effective, you need to change something. And we call that monitor stakeholder engagement. So let's talk about the tasks and the enablers involved with this. Let's talk about the number one task. It's engage stakeholders as far as the process of engaging them. Be aware that in the people domain, you also have tasks associated with people and stakeholder engagement and stuff. But for this one, we're talking more about the process. So this task on day 18 is going to go a little bit more into the technicalities of engaging stakeholders. It's going to go more into the tools and the methods. All right, so the very first one points to a well-known method, a well-known tool, and it's the power interest grid. So the power interest grid should be used to analyze stakeholders. It simply says analyze stakeholders. That is power interest grid, influence impact grid, and so on. It will do you well to explore these in your 6th edition. Make sure you know the difference between power and influence. Power deals more with authority. Influence deals with leadership. Keep that in mind. The next thing, after you have analyzed stakeholders for their level of power at any point in time, their impact on the project at any point in time, because that could change. After you have done that, you ensure that you are given the right amount of focus on these stakeholders that have a high level of power and a high level of interest versus those that have a low level of power and a low level of interest. In fact, we have the MKMK configuration. That's what I call it. It's monitor, keep satisfied, manage close, and keep informed. You want to make sure you follow that configuration as you are interacting with stakeholders. Also remember that your analysis is not a one-time thing, and that is because stakeholders are fluid. They are dynamic. They're humans, so they're always moving on us. They're always changing on us. They're always evolving on us. The way they may approach the project for the first phase may be different from the second phase, and so on. The next thing is to categorize stakeholders. Like I said, you could categorize them by the MKMK, or you could categorize them using the Stakeholder Engagement Assessment Matrix. I call it the SEAM. The Stakeholder Engagement Assessment Matrix is a document or tool, if you wanted to call it that you could use to bucketize stakeholders and deduce how to engage them. So a stakeholder who is, let's say, unaware, you need a strategy for that stakeholder. And your strategy needs to be one of, what do I need to do to get this stakeholder from unaware to being aware, to maybe even being in a leading role? What do I need to do to get a stakeholder who is resistant to not be resistant? And things such as that. So you have a 5 configuration. It goes URNLS. And I just call it URNSL, I beg your pardon. And I call this earns less. U for unaware, R for resistant, N for neutral, S for supportive, and L for leading. Leading is the ultimate. So how do we get a stakeholder from being resistant or neutral to actually being in a more supportive role or in a more leading role? It really depends on the stakeholder. But that's what your strategy needs to be. After you have categorized stakeholders, the next enabler is engage stakeholders by category. So again, depending on how you have categorized those stakeholders, go ahead and engage them. Are you monitoring them? Are you keeping them satisfied? Are you managing them close? Or are you keeping them informed? So you need to deduce the strategy and go after the strategy. Do it. Engage stakeholders by category. Last but not least, we have a rather long enabler which says develop, execute, and validate a strategy for stakeholder engagement. So this comes more down to what happens after you have analyzed and you've executed. Now we talk about validation. The validation of the stakeholder is what we're talking about here. The validation of your approach, of your method for engaging the stakeholder is what we're talking about here. So the question is, are you going to carry out anything differently? Are you going to do anything differently? What is your strategy going to be? Is your strategy going to be one of keeping things status quo? Or are you going to change something in how you're engaging these people? If you're going to change something in how you're engaging them, then this is where you do it. This is where you need to ask the question, okay, what is that one thing I'm going to do differently? And then you do it differently. And then you check to see if your engagement that you have modified, that you've tweaked, is actually working. That's how you do it. So I hope you found value from this. As usual, I'm going to put some questions below. Make sure you do what is needed by answering those questions. And I'm sure you will get a lot of value from the process. Like I say, just got to follow the process. And in following the process, you'll get a great output, because these are just memory joggers for a lot of you. It's really just making sure that you have mastered the information. All right, I hope you found this to be helpful. I will talk to you again very soon. All the best and bye for now. All right, my friends, so we have covered all of the content, and now let's have a brief moment to take a closer look at those questions that flew by. Here's the first page. Again, if there's any question that stumps you, I would like you to put a comment below. Let me know what it is, and I'll get back to you with an answer. Here is the second page of content in the question section. And finally, a third page, memory joggers, just to make sure that you truly have mastered all the content. All right, and that's all for today, my friends. Thanks for joining me. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, share with your friends, and I'll see you tomorrow on the next episode. Bye for now.